Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when you are. And welcome to the Asia Society Triennial We Do Not Dream Alone program to celebrate the opening of this exhibition at the Asia Society Museum and other venues across the city of New York itself. My name is Boon Hui Tan, and I'm the founding artistic director and exhibition co-curator of the exhibition. And in this show, we have artists from over 40 countries. We have about 40 artists from over 20 countries working in many sort of genres. And any consideration of course, the contemporary artistic production of the Asia Pacific, of anybody who works or is culturally, it's their native culture, cannot escape the issue of tradition or the issue of artisanal practice, because uh, you know with these very old civilizations, millennial traditions, artists always also have the option of excavating and bringing in, and sometimes having a kind of dialogue, or even if they sort of adapt or reject the tradition, it is always there. So this idea of what is contemporary is much more complex, I think, and cannot easily be reduced to these categories of craft, artisanship, tradition, and contemporary. And that's the thing to celebrate, because contemporary art is much more diverse and broad and complex than we think. The triennial theme, We Do Not Dream Alone, actually is taking reference to a line from the 1964 Yoko Ono book, which is itself a work of conceptual art, uh, where the line goes, a dream that you dream alone, and I'm paraphrasing, will always be a dream, but you dream that you dream together will become a reality. So here we are, in this conversation, talking about dreams and how, things connect us. And I feel as artistic director, that's really critical in this moment in time. The kind of mission for art today, those of us who work in this field. I think art right now, and in this exhibition, what we're trying to do is to make an argument against the tendency for isolationism, for imagining that cultures and communities and individuals could live in a self-contained bubble, could live apart from others, that cultural development, in a sense, could be contained within a specific sort of communal or geographical kind of container, like a frog in the well. I think that's a very apt kind of description. And of course, the critic, Edward Said, has spoken about the differences between what's called a mainstream and orthodox culture, and a kind of fringe culture, which many intellectuals and artists also belong in that culture. And he has spoken of, particularly in his lecture, critiquing Fukuyama's issue of the idea of the end of history. And Edward Said has spoken about how cultural development does not usually come from the mainstream orthodox fringe. It comes from the fringe, actually, where artists, intellectuals, minority cultures, those who challenge the orthodox mainstream culture, sort of work. And that kind of tension, that kind of exchange between orthodox and mainstream and fringe culture, I think it's what he's arguing drives cultural development. So in this sense, this current sort of often very polemic and ideological debate about globalization, about whether that post-pandemic we are going to revert to kind of local culture, is very ironic, because seen in this way, globalization, having to deal with the other and having the other as part of ourselves, is not a stage of historical development. It is a condition of our existence itself. And contemporary artistic practice is therefore an act of resistance against isolationism, against this reality that people, ideas, and objects are sort of connected in very complex webs of association, some of which we can see, some of which are visible, and some of which are invisible. And I think that's really, really sort of important today. So here in this program, I'm very happy to invite two of the artists that are featured in the triennial from both South Asia as well as Southeast Asia. First, we have Hamra Abbas from Pakistan, as well as Nati Utari, originally from Thailand. And what's interesting about their work is they have a new and very complex sort of relationship and positioning that is also very fluid, very flexible with regard to tradition. There's often, when I came to New York 5 years ago, I was shocked, because some curators, who are trained in the, Western tradition literally told me to my face, oh, there's only tradition, there's no contemporary, there's no real contemporary art from Asia, because they are always working within the tradition. And that's really puzzling to me as someone who's worked for 3 decades with artists across the Asia Pacific. So in this panel, I think we want to discuss these complexities, how this they are not isolationist ideas, they're not exclusive, they're not oppositional ideas. And the very important point that artists are creative beings. They take very creative and original and personal stances on all these kind of big ideas. So first, I want to introduce, invite Hamra Abbas, who is speaking to us from Lahore, and to say a little bit about her practice. And of course, she comes from, or she was trained, rather, I think that's the word I want to use, in, among many things, the Persian miniature, the Indo-Persian miniature painting tradition. But the work that she has produced for the triennial, and we'll talk about it later after we invite her to speak about her practice, is extremely unusual. Because there seems something going on that is more than just a kind of development of that tradition in the contemporary. She's taking certain very interesting sort of positions on that. So can I invite now Hamra Abbas to talk about her practice and how it has developed, in fact, many times way beyond her original sort of miniature painting practice. Hamra?
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Hamra Abbas, and considering the topic of this panel, I'm going to talk about three, or rather two works of mine. One is the one that is currently on show at Asia Society, and then two other works that I do with marble inlay. Um, so first, to talk a little bit about artists who use historically or tradition or culturally specific material. I time to time I've thought about how we keep hearing about such artists and their love or burden of tradition, and I have felt over the years that sometimes it's neither love nor burden of tradition that is the driving force for artists to deal with material that is culturally specific or tradition or rendered as traditional. It is not. It is also not about a kind of revivalism or reinvention of the past. Sometimes it is just a matter of personal choice and or a condition of certain time and location. And sometimes it is driven completely out of pragmatic concerns because conditions were such that only certain things were possible. So I learned miniature painting in the mid 90s in NCA in Lahore. It was a very vibrant time at the art school, and I remember that miniature painting was beginning to get attention at that time. It is a wonderful, most extraordinary technique of painting. So it almost felt like a must to learn it, and so I learned it. But it was for me, one of my minor interests. My major interest was to learn sculpture, which I did on the side. So when I was learning, because I was interested purely in miniature painting as a painting technique and the craft of it. So I focused on that aspect of it, and maybe it is that for that reason that later, when I use miniature painting to make work, I always used subject matter from the everyday life, and my focus, my emphasis became more on a certain kind of realism, in contrast to a certain kind of Indo-Persian sort of quintessential stylization, which I never applied in my paintings. So later, fast forward many years, I was in 2015. I was in Singapore as a resident artist with CCA, which is when I got introduced to the Chinese painting style of Gongbi due to my wonderful late friend Ize, who invited me to come to one of these lessons of Chinese painting that he was going to. So that is when I learned about this particular branch of Chinese painting, which is called Gongbi, which is a meticulous style, a precision brushwork. So I thought that it was a perfect thing for me to learn during my stay at CCA. Also important to note is that at this time I was just 5 weeks postpartum after giving birth to my second son. So I clearly did not want to do any work at this point. And to decide to learn something new was a perfect sort of metaphor to take a pause from making something new, and to learn something new for me also had kind of notes of rebirth and reconnection of sorts. So when I started learning Gongbi, my interest went into learning Gongbi was clearly because I saw many similarities between Gongbi style of painting and miniature painting, which is clearly connected historically. Gongbi and Chinese painting being much older, a technique that has clearly influenced the Indo-Persian path. So I thought I would do it very easily, but I was completely wrong because I completely failed. It took me almost 4 to 5 years to be able to create what I did, which is now on show at Asia Society right now. Because when I started painting on silk, silk is a mesh. You put paint on one side and it runs through from the other. So you paint on both sides. You paint, whereas in miniature painting, we paint on a very thick board, and the board is literally, which is called vasli, which is literally indestructible. And it is indestructible because the requirement of the work is as such that you have to paint for very long hours, weeks, sometimes months, and the board, the paper has to stay intact. Whereas when I tried to create similar imagery on silk, it would completely give away because so it took me a long time to fail again and again until I came to a point where I could finally sit down during my wonderful time at Civitella in Perugia, and focus on it with the intent that I could finally mastered the perfect fusion of miniature painting, Gongbi, and my particular style of photorealism. And I'm very proud of it. The subject matter, we can talk about it later. But similarly speaking, I would like to also talk about my practice of marble inlay, which again is a technique that is historically extremely significant in South Asia and has been practiced for hundreds of years. So when I moved back from Boston to Lahore, I started the process of building my house and my studio. And through the experience of construction, I was introduced to marble because marble was a reliable and a reliable and a good source of construction material. So there was this one work that I did in 2009. It was called Please Do Not Step, Loss of the Magnificent Story, that I did for VNA for the first Jameel Prize exhibition. This work was made in paper and was destroyed, and people were supposed to walk over it during the course of the exhibition, and the work was supposed to be destroyed, which it was after the exhibition. But the fact that it was destroyed, I always wanted to reiterate that piece in a permanent material, which I could not in years that I was living in Boston. So when I moved to Lahore, I had the opportunity to recreate this work in marble. And so when I did it, it so happened that it was created in this process called marble inlay. And with creating this one work, which was somewhere stuck in my mind for years, opened new directions for me to practice my work. And so when I did this one piece, again, I learned a new technique, and I could learn and master it very, very quickly because of my training in sculpture. And I did this one work that we were just looking at. It's a piece called Waterfall Gardens of Paradise, which is a remake of a fountain that I found in Lahore Fort. It is again a piece from the 17th century. And so this is the time when I was living between Boston and Lahore. And when I was in Boston, I made a visit to Mass MoCA to see the big Solevit retrospective. And that was out of my interest in color theory. So the show, when I saw the show, it left a huge impression on me. And when I was back in Lahore many months later, I was visiting the Lahore Fort, and I saw this particular fountain, and I thought to myself, this could pass for a complete Solevit, a perfect Solevit, only it was made in the 17th century. So I decided that I would remake this piece, and so I was certain that had I not come from this route, had I not been to Mass MoCA, I may have completely easily passed the fountain without paying much attention. So I think these journeys are very important in establishing certain tenets in your trajectory that becomes become the most important sort of impetus to kickstart new practices. So I went to Lahore Fort, and I put a big tracing paper on fountain, which was called Abshar, which is the Urdu word for waterfall, and I traced the waterfall, and I made a new marble inlay piece based on this template. Only what I did was, again, sort of coming through Solivit. The only difference that is in my waterfall and the 17th century Abshar is that I infused it with a rainbow of colors. And so, so that started me into making a whole body of work under the larger title of Gardens of Paradise. And when I was much into my fascination and my practice of marble inlay, did I actually realize that it is in fact a historically very important technique that was apparently transported from Italy in the 17th century and has been since used in the decorative arts and in architecture in South Asia, but surprisingly has been overlooked in the contemporary art. So that is one of the main areas that I'm working today. And presently, what I'm is large project, which in marble inlay, where for the imagery I've borrowed from the again to paint a to where I've infused both practices of culture and painting. Yeah.
Thank you, Hamra. I think thank you for your very eloquent sort of articulation of I think this idea of I'm using the word in a very good sense. I think the artistic promiscuity of artists, is very important. And literally what you've described is how that the reality of contemporary practice today is completely transnational, not just through time, but through place. That while, you may have, started from a particular kind of cultural and aesthetic tradition, but, sometimes the encounter with other aesthetic traditions, triggers a new line of inquiry. I mean, I was very taken with your example of what you did with the fountain, after seeing, well, Soliwit, no less, that coming back to, in a sense, and I use this really in quotation marks, a place of your native culture, suddenly the lens changes. And I think that is a really important point that is not sort of emphasized enough. And I think it's really part of why art is so important, because art is also not just about what is represented, but the lens, and how, the practices of contemporary artists changes the lens, that when you encounter something that you may have seen every day, the encounter through the aesthetics of another tradition, I think completely changes the lens of which, when you come back and look at something that you have seen, every day or for long periods of time. I think that's really sort of important, because also it deals with this idea in those of us working outside the Western tradition, this idea of the problem of authentic origination, particularly when it comes to painting, anything that is pictorial, whether abstract or figurative. We are always burdened with this idea of, is it authentic if oil painting came from Europe or wherever? And I think that's also a very silly question to ask. And what Hamra has sort of described sort of really throws that out the window. That's really not how artistic practice is sort of done. So now I want to turn to Nati, and Nati has, whom I've written about and known for many years. It's very interesting to me, because as an artist from Southeast Asia, from Thailand, it's very specific, and it's a predominantly Buddhist country. Yet your work in painting, you come from, and you were thoroughly trained in a very specific tradition. Your school, Silapakon, was founded by a sculptor of the Florentine school, and you have spoken of your syllabus, how you were trained as going through the really European genres of still life, history painting, portraiture, landscape painting, and your whole career seems to be also as a non-European painter, but someone very much in Southeast Asia, also critiquing that tradition. But the interesting is, some people will say the tradition does not belong to you, which is very strange if we look at the body and the range of your work. So could you tell us about this, going back, and again, I put it in quotation mark, this sort of burden of tradition, and how as an artist you found freedom in that, in your sort of articulation and your critique of that?
Okay. Thank you. I think I will give you a little introduction of my background and why does the classic Western art always appear in my art. I graduated from a university in Thailand, and this university founded by a sculptor from Florence, Italy, almost 100 years ago. His name is Corrado Ferrucci. He came to Thailand to be a chief of sculpture for the government monument project. The Thai government and that time led a country restoration plan to convince the Westerner that Thailand was civilized and modernized as the West. So in the 1940, a modern art academy was then established to shape modern art concept in Thailand by this Florentine sculptor. Yeah. All the art programs were based on Italian academies. I started my art study at the university in 1988. I remember that My art study program only focus on Western art. And it's quite strange that no one asks any question to art college and university why Thai students have to study Western art program instead of their local and regional art. Because I can say that 80% of my Western knowledge in art college and university came from pictures and illustration books in library. Looking back, it's like dark humor, you know, because I feel like drifting between um, illusion of knowledge with the empty attitude for local art. It made me question about myself and my art knowledge after I start my career as a full-time artist in 1994. In the beginning of the everything in my painting knowledge, um, my knowledge of Eastern art was so little compared with the Western art that made my idea of working with local painting seem impossible because its value under the value was underestimated according to the viewpoint in the 90s. My question was, how is happening? Where should I go from there? You know, because I started learning about the East seriously again, focus on Thai traditional paintings and Buddhism, and study with the other Western wisdom and at the same time including religion, history, and philosophy. All this become my knowledge base and inspiration until now. Yeah.
Hmm.
And for the painting, I'm interested in Western traditional paintings because it gives me answer to question in my creation. As I said earlier, I may have Western art knowledge, but I still got many practice problems. I don't have sample pieces for study or actual context for experience. So I need to train myself 3 or 4 times harder for getting those knowledge. Can you imagine that there's a student who has a chance to see a masterpiece painting in European museum in limited time at only one time every 3 years like that?
Hmm.
It sounds still interesting and challenging for me today.
Hmm.
For the paintings, I'm interested in various painting style and technique and often use them with my work. They include the Flemish, not only Italian, Flemish and Spanish, cool, depending on expressive function. However, Florentine School of Art is something special to me uh, because I came from that Italian school. This is why I often paint with Florentine aesthetic. Yeah.
So I think we can quickly move into the works that both of you are doing for the triennial. I'd like to go back to Hamra now to talk about this. We heard you say that this particular project was very special to you. Also, that you had initially sort of encountered that Chinese or began to learn the Gongbi technique in Singapore. It took you 4 to 5 years, but the work for the triennial was actually done when you were in residency in Italy. I mean, again, the kind of I'm very fascinated by the kind of completely transnational nature of that production. Could you say that? Talk a bit about the work? And I'm very fascinated by why you chose to also employ a different kind of technique, and also the use of silk, because you said a little bit about how challenging silk was as a kind of media. I think we may have lost the connection a little bit.
Oh yeah.
There, you're back. Can you hear us? Would you like to talk about your work in the triennial? Yeah.
Yes. So, so my work in the triennial is a series of portraits. So when I paint, I have in the last 20 years, I have only painted faces. I have a special affinity to painting faces. I started painting faces and nothing else in miniature painting ever. And I think that was very strongly connected with my practice of sculpture, because when I was painting, I could feel that I'm modeling the faces with clay. So so I think it is my practice of sculpture was bridged with my painting faces in a miniature style since ever. um, in this particular series, I am focusing on the people from the transgender community that I have met randomly over the last 5 years, and documented them while on my commute to work and back. So I did not do it as a project. It is literally a picture of my everyday life. Like, I'd be going for work, and someone and a person from the transgender community, street performers would come and strike a conversation, would come and talk to me in the car, and I would talk to them from the car, or sometimes I would get out of the car and talk to them, take a picture, tell them I'm an artist, I might paint their face, this is what I do, show them pictures on my phone, and make these micro sort of micro relationships, build these tiny relationships in the everyday. So I've been collecting photographs documenting the transgender community people over the last 5 years, and during this time continuously failing to be able to convey it or portray it in a manner that was in my head somewhere, so beautiful, so pristine and perfect, but somehow in front of me it wasn't at all. So finally, I have many portraits, and finally, so when I went to Perugia, I could sit in the complete peace and isolation in my studio. I think it was the perfect time, and I was looking at a lot of Renaissance painting at that time. We were taking a lot of trips to neighborhood areas in Perugia, and so I think that particular style of slow burn that you associate with Renaissance painting with Leonardo was in my head, because I was thinking about these rosy cheeks and these blue eyeshadows. It was a lot about getting to that beautiful slow burnt faces, and I think when you apply those hundreds and thousands of tiny little brush strokes, with each brush stroke you add a small amount of pigment, but I feel that at the same time, with that measured little pressure of the brush, you're also burnishing the painting. So you kind of adding radiance, that little pressure that you apply, you polish the pigment with pigment, and you add this radiance. So there comes a point when the picture shines, the picture turns, first it's a picture and then it turns to something very extraordinary. And so painting every picture takes you through these stages of first to create a surface that is created entirely with pigment. So it's literally painting on a painting, which is just held in with this mesh, which is the silk.
But why did you make the decision to use such a difficult sort of material, such as this silk ground that you use, and such a laborious kind of technique or approach?
So the technique was always laborious and labor intensive for me, even when I was painting on paper. But I had no idea that painting on silk would be so difficult, mainly because of the nature of the silk. Because the silk, it gives away, even if it's prepared. But I struggled a lot with different kind of surfaces and then mounting the surfaces, like how do you present it, and so I was very happy to finally being able to mount it, and I mounted in so many ways. Like first I used to send my paintings to Singapore to get them mounted in a traditional manner. And with the traditional manner, which is a wet technique, there's a wet technique and there's a dry technique. So the wet technique destroyed the works, and then the dry techniques destroyed the works. So it was like I constantly failed, And so finally, very recently, I was able to successfully mount the silk. And when I was in New York last summer, when we actually met and spoke about this project, is when I magically found a vendor in US. I keep saying that US is this amazing place where you can buy anything under the sun. So I finally bought my silk that worked for me. It was a double body Japanese silk that I finally found in LA. And so I brought this silk from LA to, learned in Singapore, first in Pakistan. I bought the silk in LA and I brought it to Perugia to finally have the time to sit and be able to infuse and create the image that was in my head. And yeah, so I'm very happy with the result. Yes, I said that already.
Some would say it's a very artistically masochistic sort of process. I think so far the visitors I've guided through, I mean, they've been absolutely fascinated by it. And also because in the exhibition, we actually have also another piece from a Chinese contemporary ink painter also on silk. And I'm amazed that once you point it out, visitors start seeing both the similarities and the differences between the two works, and I'm very happy at that kind of excitement and that kind of inquiry. I mean, I think the guards keep catching people going so close to Amra's paintings to look at the detailing, and they are trying to figure out, oh, that is silk, which was quite sort of interesting, and I think again, you describe it so eloquently how it's not just geographical places, but how many different positions you take over time that resulted in this work. And that's why contemporary art is so important, because it really reminds us of how we are all using and we live in these complex webs of association and relationships with each other. I mean, who would think that this gorgeous series of work that is appearing in the New York Triennial in New York started with the artists having daily conversations with, on the way to work, in the car or coming out of the car, as you were saying, with members of the transgender community. And, so really, really sort of, I think, articulating that particular point quite clearly. So now I want to turn to Nati, and I think your work in the Triennial is also very fascinating because you chose to respond to a particular 19th century court painter, Kra In Krong, who is a historically very specific figure in the history of Thai painting, especially with regard to his relationship to European imagery. Could you say a little bit about, tell us about this work and your process, and what were you thinking, and why Kra In Krong and this particular work?
Actually, this is my third time to do the Kra In Krong paintings. My work in this exhibition are, as you know, are inspired by Kra In Krong's mural painting of giant lotus in the pond. I'm very impressed with Thai style painting, surrealism blended with Western classic language and mythical atmosphere. For me, this kind of condition can reflect many things involving internal conflict between imagination in Western knowledge and Eastern rules. The main idea of this painting are a giant lotus and a dreamlike event in odd environment. I I want this painting refer to uh, Dharma puzzle. You know Dharma puzzle, right? Dharma puzzle is the signature of the artist Kra In Krong. He always do Dharma puzzle in his painting. You can see the group of characters that I add to this painting have their own sign and meaning. For
Could we
example,
put up the Kra In Krong painting, please? Yeah.
yeah, this one.
Could you, Nati, maybe for our non-Thai viewers, say a little bit about Dharma
Okay.
and also the lotus. What does the lotus mean?
Lotus it means the wisdom in the Buddhism. So Kruen Krong, he get an order from the King Rama IV to do the Thai traditional paintings content under the westernized style. That in the reason that I told you before, right? For the colonized uh, in the reason for protect themselves from the colonized from the in the colonial era. Sorry.
Thailand was the only country that was not politically,
Yes,
colonized formally,
yeah.
and I think this particular monarch was quite important in modernizing, Thailand at that time as a way to I suppose stave off formal colonization by the Europeans, and Kra In Krong was like one of the sort of instruments, so to speak, of the monarchy at that time, who asked him to develop a particular style that was also not just Thai or Siamese, but also, showed that Thailand could respond and be very open to the new ideas coming from Europe, I gather. But this work that you're talking, it's a temple mural, right? It's not easily.
Yes. It's a moral painting because Goen Kong he was a monk. He was a monk and he also the court painters in the King Rama IV of Siam. So that's why I'm very impressed his work because he always make balance between the Buddhism and Western style under the political reason. So back to my paintings. Huh? Can you show my slide of the paintings? Yes, thank you. This painting is I draw this painting from various details similar with Graham Kong works process in 19th century. I paint this painting from a few vintage postcards and auto picture information I kept. You will see the monk in the paintings do actually exist. He is a forest monk. I took his picture when he visited my place last year. You can see this painting, this landscape painting, it came from this kind of postcard I collect. I mixed all these postcards to be a big landscape painting as the Kuen Kong did in his period. That is the way I do this painting. So my process is look like the photo montage making actually.
So you've never actually been to the very European scenery
No.
that you're painting, just like postcard. So it's like the mass media and mass imagery of the moment.
Yes, because Graham Cook also did his process like that. He get all the information from American, from the European gift, and he developed all that information to be his painting. Yeah.
So he had never been to the actual sort of European and American scenes he was painting. Like he had never been. As he was a monk.
Imagination. Imagination. Yeah.
So what is the result of this way of working, in terms of what the final painting actually looks like?
For this show, right?
Yeah.
For the show, I want to refer to Dharma Baso as I told you, but let me show you the detail in the painting again, please.
Yeah.
Can you show me the slide? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And this is the in progress. Do we have an image of the final painting?
Yeah, I don't have that one. I think I think you have that one, right? I think you have the work, the complete work. I didn't give them.
Maybe you didn't give them.
Yeah. I didn't give, but I think you will prepare for it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Why don't you continue talking and they'll put up
Okay,
that.
okay. Sorry. For this painting, I want to show how the Asian lifestyle culture will be like lost all local belief. I still believe that in my opinion, culture root and essence can be seen from mindset, viewpoint, and way of living which reflect belief and faith of people in that particular culture. So I believe that the painting can talk about the conflict between the East and West under the colonial uh, point of view, because I am an artist in between East and West. Sometimes I'm very confused that uh, who I am. So I want this painting to show that this is the product of the artists who are in between of the culture.
This is the painting.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, yeah. Can you see the main idea of this painting are the giant lotus and a dreamlike event in the art environment. I want this painting refer to Dharma puzzle as I told you. For example, the lotus show the Buddhist wisdom and the truth of life. The lower part of the painting show the children paying attention to something in the water and their own reflection.
Mm.
For me, this is comparable to the self-important or self-culture in social media. The next are the group of old men sitting on the bench, chatting. In the foreground, a monk points out to the blooming lotus. All the events are related, reflecting contemporary conditions happening in every culture. I think it's a fragile turning point between the old and new concept because the old and new value are often related to the politics and power. This kind of crisis is often seen in countries with long cultural history as as what happened in Thailand now, if you may know.
Mm.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Thanks. I think it's very fascinating. I mean, people have taken through the exhibition when they encounter this painting. Of course, the size is one thing.
Yeah,
It's enormous 6-panel mural, and of course, the original inspiration the of Kra Inkrong, people viewing giant lotus, is also a temple mural, and I think that kind of response to it, reference to its original inspiration, I think is very interesting. But most visitors looking at it, they'll find it very odd. I think, especially when they haven't been informed or haven't read the text that talked about how these are essentially appropriated images from tourist postcards and so on. It's not one scene. It's sort of like stitched together from various sort of second-hand imagery, so to speak, that is appropriate. So I'm also thinking of how today, because of how we are trained to look at the world, when we look at Orientalist painting, European imageries of Asia and the Orient, so to speak, we find it very exotic, but it not with the same type of strangeness that we get looking at this painting that you have created. I think it's also there's a difference in we are used to a certain way of I wouldn't say used to, but we sort of understand the Orientalist view. But here you're almost doing an Occidental view,
Yeah, yeah,
Asian, piecing together without actually first-hand knowledge of, this strange alpine scenery. Suddenly there's the Venus de Milo there, and then suddenly there is this, clearly a kind of very specific Buddhist symbol of the giant lotus rising out of
yeah,
very muddy waters, and all the imagery of also of very mass culture, commercial culture, shopping and so on. It's just sort of, I was very fascinated at this kind of how even this strangeness and the way the imagery is appropriated and collaged together also reflect, in a sense, our existence today.
mm, mm, mm,
This kind of multiple collage
mm,
existence, of places far and near all together, recent and old, leaps in time. And it's a really, really sort of very also dislocating way of looking at the imagery. I mean, I see many visitors sort of wrinkle their brows and they're trying to figure out what exactly is going on in this scene, But
yeah.
how can you say, just summarize, if I had to ask you to summarize, I mean, what is your intention? What did you hope the viewer will take away with this very odd sort of work?
Yeah, because I think the art atmosphere is very important for that work because it can show the situation that what happened in Asian and European. You know,
Mm.
I want to show some strange feeling uh, between Asian and Western that can mix to be this kind of painting.
Mm.
I also want to know the feedback from the audience in the triennial because I want to know that uh, what kind of painting they can imagination that I refer to. That
Okay.
is in my reference,
Okay.
because
So
most of yeah
yeah, I want to ask a question of both of you, a very pointed question, which is sort of like how this whole issue of your tradition, the cultural context that you work with. I mean, I think Hamra has said a little bit about that later, but in your quite long and diverse careers, do you encounter people who expect you to be a certain kind of artist because of simply where you come from? Like you're from Lahore, or you're from Bangkok, and what is your reaction, given the practice that you have? I mean, it's a question I think some I met a certain Indian artist, and when she was in New York, she says, I'm constantly being asked, why does my work not look Indian? And then she was very perplexed. What does Indian sort of mean? So I want to ask you this question simply because, is it because your work references and draws upon or even critiques a particular kind of culturally specific tradition? Do people expect you to be sort of like trapped or only working in that tradition? And when your work doesn't explicitly or visually on the surface, in terms of the color, the form, the style, the technique, use that, are people surprised, and what is your reaction to that? Hamra?
So for the first 15 years of my career, I have lived outside Pakistan. I moved back. I left Pakistan in 2002 and returned around 2015-16, while I was still for 4 years between US and Lahore. And while I lived in Berlin and Boston, New York and other cities for smaller periods of time, I have always responded to that particular condition, the location, the people. I have always made social connections with the people and the everyday life that I found myself in different cities. And so my work has always been very diverse. And now when so I think it was never kind of speaking to a certain kind of expectations. I don't feel that there was a certain kind of expectation for me to produce a certain kind of work, but there was definitely an expectation for me to produce one kind of work, and I think that was more of my problem than to make something that looks like it comes from my part of the world, or there was some part where I felt that I'm expected to make work that talks about feminist concerns, and
Why
and because
specifically?
I,
Why?
feminist issues, women issues, Muslim women issues, especially when I was in the US. I thought that I was again and again being asked about the difference between my life and practice when I was living in Pakistan and now when I found my new home in the US, and how things have changed to the better, of course. To And I always thought that my work was no more or less due to my gender, or due to being a Muslim woman artist from Pakistan now living in the US. And so I think my reaction was always to run away from expectations. So I ran away from people expecting me to make one kind of work. I ran away from people, back in the day before social media, when email was the only medium people could make connection. We used to get fan mails, right? And in my fan mail, people often wrote to me, addressed me as "Dear Mr. Abbas,"
Oh, no.
so which was interesting, because they could not make a direct connection with me, and with my work and me being a woman, which was an interesting insight for me at that time. So I think my reaction is always to do the opposite of what is expected.
Bravo.
Mhm.
uh, Nati?
Yes, I think I got the same problem with Hamra in one meaning, that the people always expect that we will do just one kind of original works or one style like that. But I got a bit different, more problem, because for the Western audience, they will think that I try to be a Western painters. And for the Asian, they also complain that why I don't do the Asian style for my paintings. So that is mean they also not accept that I am Asian painters. This is my problem. But I I turn this problem to be my characters. And from that time, I didn't I didn't get involved with that problem anymore. So I keep to do what I do, what I want to do. I want to do the Western art in the term of in the term of colonialism, as I did. Yeah.
Bravo. Thank you. That both of you very sort of eloquently uh, expressed, and I'm getting a message from the organizers that we should wrap up. I think the takeaway from this really is the very personal choices. I think Hamra said it very well, that artists take with regard to how they use the cultural and aesthetic traditions that they began their career from, but it certainly is not where they will only sort of develop their careers within. I think not just a physical transnationalism, but a kind of cultural and aesthetic transnational position on artistic practice at various moments in time, echoing across locations and across time. I mean, both of y'all also actively engage with and also critique, traditions that come from with long histories, but also, across cultural divides. I think that really is a kind of important at this moment when we are in a kind of moment where not just in art, but in politics and society and social development, there is a kind of lack of sometimes a kind of contraction, of possibility, because there is, in the realm of society and culture, there is frequently an idea that diversity, not just cultural, but diversity of positions, is sometimes very dangerous. People want to know, what are you? What kind of, positioning are you? Are you A? Are you B? Are you C? And I think contemporary art is really important to insist on choice, to insist on the choice for multiple positionings across time and space. So I thank you for, how your practice reminds us of this freedom and really the positionality, the multiple positioning of artists and of art today, regardless of where you come from and where you are at particular moments in time. It sounds very abstract, but I think it's also a very daily kind of reality. People and art needs to remind us of that. So, please come and see the Asia Society Triennial Exhibition. It's on, the main exhibition is on at the Asia Society Museum Galleries. Admission is free with time ticketing, because capacity is limited to protect everyone in the COVID sort of era. The full sort of extended text related to each artist and artwork in the triennial is now available on the artist pages on the Asia Society Triennial site. Please book your tickets and please learn more about these artists at www.asiasociety.org/triennial. And the show is on until February of next year. You have time, but please go and see, help us spread the word. And finally, it only leaves me to, thank our two artists, Nati Utarit, Hamra Abbas, for participating in today's program, letting us hear your very personal thoughts, but also for your gift of art in the triennial in this time, and for encouraging us, taking us along on this journey to dream with you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Stay safe, and hope to see you again. I'm Boon Hui Tan, Artistic Director of the Asia Society Triennial, signing off. Thank you. Thank you, guys and ladies and gents. Thanks, Nati. Thanks, Hamra.